So I want to talk today about climate and the Department of Defense and how we're looking at it. And it's ironic we're doing it on a day that at a time that the U.S. and global equity markets continue to hit new highs. The Fed's likely to, in the next day or two, start their tapering and make an announcement on their tapering plans. There's calls for them to raise rates. You have the Manchin issue and trying to get the things put through in Washington, and we have what's going on in Glasgow right now with the nations coming together to try and lay out their vision for getting us into a better climate state. Ironically, if you have been following some of the statements coming out of there, it's pretty fascinating. President Biden said the coming decade, is critical for deciding the future path forward. And then a couple hours later, Prime Minister Modi said that it'll take to 2070 to reduce net greenhouse gases. And then President Xi, who did not attend, released a 505-word statement on it. And I think if we go back to what he was saying the other day in the G20, where he was basically saying that to get this done, it's going to be the responsibility of the developed nations to lead by example on emissions reduction, fully accommodate the special difficulties and concerns of developing countries, deliver on their commitments on climate financing, and provide technology, capability building, and other support for developing countries. And he even went as far as saying previously to the G20 that he thinks that the way we're handling intellectual property rights needs to be reconsidered to help the emerging economies better. I'm wondering, is China still considering themselves an emerging economy or a world leader? So it's kind of conflicting statements there, but you can see the mess that this is going to be to get where we want to get to. But from a defense perspective, there's a lot going on and a lot to consider. So, the statement by the Secretary of Defense that there's little about what the Department of Defense does to defend the American people that's not affected by climate change. And you don't really think of that as much, but when you get into what are some of the implications for national security and defense of climate change, it's really, we're seeing a reshaping of the geostrategic, operational, and tactical environments that the Defense Department has to consider. Growing risks and creating new challenges for our interest around the world. It's changing the strategies and what capabilities and what equipment we're bringing to bear. And then you have things like COP26 and what that does to our strategic interests, relationships, and competitions and priorities. And then the Department of Defense has to think about this in everything they do now, which is not really what you want at a time that they also have to really modernize and upgrade and really change the way we approach defense, particularly given some of the experiences of what's went on in Afghanistan and the Middle East and how we're fighting different types of wars. And at the same time, you have what's going on with China in the South China Sea and Taiwan that is looming large over this. So you have a lot of dynamics at play here that the Department of Defense is going to have to focus on, and they're going to be doing that against a backdrop where all nations are facing financial challenges given the pandemic. So you have a collision of geopolitical, economic, and forces and social forces all hitting at once, creating a really different dynamic in the way the Department of Defense has to think about how we're planning and how we're preparing to move forward. So there are implications on a lot of different levels. And at home, we've had these extreme weather events that have caused real hardships, but that's also created some challenges where our military readiness and training is disrupted, but also it's getting us into where the Army's had to help out with some of the fires and things like that we've experienced. In the Arctic, you have a whole new problem with the permafrost melting and the push for rare earths and other critical materials to make the technology transitions that are going on. That's a big area that's increasing area for dispute with Russia and others, really looking at how we're going to play that and who's owns those waters and how we're going to think about the underwater implications of that. In the Pacific, you have rising sea levels, and what the implication for that is, we have a lot of Air Force bases in Guam and the Marshall Islands and other places that the rising sea levels are putting at risk some of the capabilities and what we can do there, and will those bases still be as good? And then at the same time, you have China and Russia trying to use climate to, either Russia's case in particular with the Arctic, trying to gain influence, and there'll be disputes coming out of this. We think it's setting up for another level of conflict around climate that is beyond what we've normally been used to. So the Department of Defense has been focused on this for a while. In 2014, it had to create a new roadmap for climate change, as it was defined as a national security threat, and they had to list the vulnerabilities. In 2018, they came out with the statement that climate change is a direct threat to the US and it's impacting our stabilities around the world, and that has big implications for us. And Congress went as far as asking the DoD to consider climate change in basically everything they do and in all their planning. They then had the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment be the climate leader in this area. And then this year, President Biden signed into a rule that climate considerations are an essential element of our foreign policy and national security. So a lot of words, but what does it mean? And I think there are real implications of what's going on for the military and for geopolitics in general. You have, significantly higher temperatures. And I actually saw a study out of a report out of what was going on. One of the scenarios that they have in Glasgow for 2070, you can see the southern part of the United States have average temperatures moving up to 30 Celsius, which they're around, I think, 13 to 15 right now, and have been for the last 20 or 30 years. So that's a big shift, and it's moving up pretty quickly. And what does that mean? And how does that impact us? And has all sorts of implications from a defense perspective, but also from an economic perspective. We've had worsening participation, and then these unpredictable weather conditions like we've seen with the wildfires out in the West, and we're having droughts where we don't need them, and having excessive rainfalls where we don't need that either. So it's not actually working out the way we want it to. And then it's creating competition over regions is one of the big impacts, and resources. And we think the resource issue is going to be one of the major ones. And that's going to really have a big impact on strategic alliances and alignments. The demands on how the military operates and how we function is going to change. And that means a rethink of how we're defending ourselves and defending our interests. One of the big concerns that I have is the humanitarian crises are going to increase, which could threaten stability and security in regions. And we're seeing that already in places. And now you add to that, in extreme events, you could have mass migration issues and social unrest, political crises, and failed states. And the last thing we can afford right now is failed states and migration events, because of the social aspects and the political aspects that we saw when we had failed states with Syria and the migration into Europe and the political problems that caused. So we have to think about this a lot differently than we have in the past. And it's, it's right here, it's in front of us. We can't ignore it anymore for those who had been. And I think a lot of government leaders have, by their actions, have ignored it. So we're going to be facing a pretty different world. And here's just a graphic on looking at it with, the flooding and the droughts and what it means and what it could lead to. And I think this is going to be a bigger part of how we think about things. And one of the challenges that we've talked about and is getting increased talk about is, how do you get there and what are the implications? And, BP just announced today they think we're back to 100 million barrels of oil a day, which would be pre-COVID levels in demand, which isn't exactly the direction we're looking to go to solve the climate problem. So I think there's going to be a mismatch of the desires and the needs. And that's going to be even stressed further by the pandemic, which is creating financial hardships for a lot of nations to get there. And when you combine that with the inflationary pressures that the emerging economies are seeing right now, creates even more strain. So there is a need to help out the different areas. I'm not sure quite how China fits in the developing versus developed economies, other than by convenience. For them, it works whichever side they want to be on. But I think that's one of the big issues that we're going to have to be faced with. But the other problems are getting into how it impacts agricultural production and food prices and food shortages and instability there. The marine ecosystems, which I'm big on scuba diving and underwater photography, and I've seen the effects firsthand of climate change on the bleaching of the barrier reef and other areas. That's going to add to even greater geopolitical problems, particularly for those nations that rely so heavily on fishing for food. And I think that's going to be another source of geopolitical friction. We're already having fishing disputes, although I think it's more related to France and the UK dealing with some other issues, not necessarily climate. But then you have issues around how diseases are going to be transmitted, and with the pandemic and other things. That's going to be another element that we have to take into account. And we're going to have territory disputes around, water. And water is a big problem, and it's going to be continuing to grow. And then you have supply chain issues that we're already dealing with that could be exacerbated by this. So, I think this quote says it all. You can't have lasting security without addressing the climate crisis. And I'm not sure how we get there, so that's for much smarter people. I'm just trying to describe the environment that we're operating in right now. So I'll stop there, Mark.
All right. Some food for thought. Questions, comments?
There's one issue I want to add, though, which is we've had budget shortfalls for a lot of the NATO nations in terms of hitting their 2% target. And when you're trying to do that on top of dealing with the pandemic and all the other issues that so many nations are dealing with, that creates a void. And you're doing that against a time that Russia and China are really getting aggressive on hypersonics and other, more aggressive things. And we're also now dealing with moving into space. So I just don't know how you do all the things that everyone wants to do without really strong leadership, creating priorities and getting consensus on priorities in a very fractured global economy. I think is going to be really difficult. So I don't think there's quick answers or quick solutions for this. And it's going to create some strains on a lot of economies. I'll stop there.
So someone asked a question before I make the snide remark about Saturday Night Live on our president. Approval ratings are at 41, 42.
Yeah, and actually that's interesting. He's at really low approval ratings, and the only person who's in that neighborhood that's in a senior or highly visible role is former President Trump. So you have, a real, leadership issue, which speaks to the frustrations that I think people have about a lot of things these days. And when you see the numbers that if we do that next week, what Gallup's out with right now is not encouraging. So
just on that point, Steve, I mean, you got a huge race in my backyard in Virginia.
Yep.
Right. That's going to be, everyone's kind of all eyes on that in terms of, just a kind of nation swell and sentiment, which, should be resolved today. Probably not resolved. It's really close. So I think it's going to come down to the wire. It'll be telling.
And it'll be, I would almost bet that it's going to be contested.
What? In this day and age? Come on.
Yeah, fully contested and will drag on, and it'll be fascinating. The other element of it too is you have a very successful Wall Streeter, where when Romney did it, he was vilified, and now, maybe it's not such a bad thing all the time. So I think there's a real implications out of Virginia more so than New Jersey. And Frank Luntz was out and his reason for that was, I think there's only been 4 times that the incumbent has has been upset in Virginia, and that each of those times it was pretty impactful on future politics, is what he was
Yeah,
saying.
just remember that Mark Warner, who's been a longtime friend, was one of the founders of Columbia Capital here as a private equity guy, and it wasn't a problem for him. So I mean, obviously, sentiment has changed over the years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to watch for a lot of different reasons, because I think it'll have a pretty profound impact on people's view about what's coming up in the midterms. So.
And I have to wonder if that impacting the way Joe Manchin's approaching things as well, being a state away and still close to DC, and thinking about the implications. It actually may strengthen his resolve, which is going to be interesting to see, because he's pretty resolute to begin with.
You make me want to share a year ago today. Do you remember this? We thought we were going to figure out what the election meant.
Yes, I do.
If
only we knew.
Yeah, we had what was the I don't know if I've got any part of that, but it was clear that we thought it was going to be a split. And I guess, I think it was not too long after that, you had your Manchin comment.
Yeah.
Split out.
We have a math problem that we're going to have to deal with in a way that we're not really focused on dealing with it. And I think that's a credit to Joe Manchin to say, it used to be we'd get nervous and politicians would sweat about spending $1 billion, and now we don't think twice about $1 trillion. And it's pretty fascinating when you think about it in that context. It wasn't that long ago that they would haggle over $1 billion. Now we're haggling over trillions and trillions, and the math just is getting tougher. So, and I say that with an outlook that we think growth is going to be good around the world next year too, which is kind of mind-boggling. So you got to think about it. And then just to throw one more thing from a market perspective, I don't know if you saw, everyone saw the tweet on Musk last night where he said they hadn't signed the deal with Hertz yet, and it took a lot out of the stock, and then it's rebounded quite a bit since then. But Avis came out today saying they were thinking they're going to, take a serious look at their EV fleet and all that. And I think they were up at 178% today. And what drives them is, business travel and all that, which, as we know, is still a little bit not quite where it needs to be. So it's just fascinating that you have a new meme area to focus on with climate and EVs. So it's just a little unusual activity there.
Or maybe people prefer they can to drive instead of fly. Hi, Susan Payne. I haven't seen you for a while. You're on mute.
Hi. Sorry, guys. I've been away for a while. I just got back from Mauritius, actually. I was there on business, but that was interesting. It's changed.
How so?
Mauritius is hopping. I didn't expect it to be building and growing, and it's now taken on the mantle of the wealthiest country in Africa. But being there on business was really an eye-opener. I've not been there for a few years now, and my companies are based there. And the waterfront is being developed dramatically. It's becoming more and more, Cape Town-esque along the waterfront. And you're seeing a lot of South Africans moving in to Mauritius, which makes very good sense given what's happening in South Africa right now because of the deterioration there. And it's, remember, I know it's an island, it's 45 miles by 28 miles, but it is quite a lovely place to be. It's, I'd encapsulate Mauritius as Africa run by Indians, 67% Indian, run by Indians, but speaking French. So how weird is that? But really good food. You can eat very well for, literally $12 a person. And I'm talking 2 gin and tonics and 3 meals and 3 courses. I mean, it's a bit of a shocker. You can live very well there.
So we have Africa as a breakout which you can join by Zoom
Great.
with the geographic asset allocation on the 16th. A little later in the day for you, but then an asset allocation, but the breakouts are at 4 and 4:30.
Well, I'm